When someone is dying, they are, for better or worse, their authentic self. The mask, if they ever had one, comes off completely. So what do those big personality types look like when they're dying? The narcissists and sociopaths? Well, it's complicated. Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk when a narcissist dies. The word narcissist gets thrown around all too freely these days. Just because someone thinks highly of themselves doesn't mean they're a narcissist. Just because someone is a tad arrogant doesn't mean they're a narcissist. Like a lot of things, clinical narcissism, i.e. narcissistic personality disorder, is a spectrum. We've explained before how someone's arrogance often stems from insecurity, which is true, but your general arrogant co-worker is like primary school sports carnival level compared to someone with diagnosable NPD, which is like Olympic level arrogance and insecurity. Only when these traits are inflexible, maladaptive and persisting and cause significant functional impairments or subjective distress do they constitute narcissistic personality disorder. So NPD involves a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration and lack of empathy. Those with narcissistic personality disorder may have a grandiose self of self-importance. They often exaggerate their achievements or talents or will outright lie about them. Be preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty and ideal love. Believe that they are special and can only be understood by others that are special or high status. Require excessive admiration. They crave it and they need it like a drug. Have a huge sense of entitlement and have unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment. Take advantage of others to achieve their own wants and needs, lack empathy or is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, is often envious of others and believes others are envious of them, and shows arrogant, conceited behaviors and attitudes. On the flip side of this, most individuals with NPD are extremely insecure in themselves and often feel ashamed, sometimes to the point of feeling completely empty. Not that they will ever show that or ever imply that, but that's what's running it underneath. Naturally, they do not do well with the slightest criticism or what they believe to be criticism, which could be anything. As you can imagine, people with NPD have massive relationship difficulties because of problems related to self-preoccupation, the need for admiration, and insensitivity to others. In the DSM, which codes and defines mental illnesses, NPD is a cluster B personality disorder, meaning a personality disorder with dramatic, emotional, or erratic features. Other disorders in this category include antisocial personality disorder, commonly referred to as psychopaths or sociopaths, borderline personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. Cluster B personality disorders are notoriously hard to treat because in order to seek treatment, you need to be aware that you have an issue and be motivated to dealing with it, which is extremely unlikely here. This means many people with these disorders aren't diagnosed. And thankfully, true narcissists only make up about 1 to 2% of the population, and it does affect men more than women, but not by a massive margin. So with all that said, try imagining having a parent with NPD or being married to someone with NPD. And as a side note, yes, a lot of domestic violence perpetrators do show classic NPD traits. But what is someone who is self-centered, arrogant, thinks they are better than everyone, and has no empathy like when they're dying? Hospice Experience. So in my work as a psych at a hospice facility, I've dealt with 2 patients who were actually diagnosed with NPD. Though of course they denied it, but it was as damn clear as day. It's never a good sign when after a few days you are silently hoping that they drop dead sooner rather than later. But we're all human, and let me tell you how it went. One was a bloke in his early 40s with cancer. He really reminded me of one of those sleazy, up-themselves CEOs you see in movies. He was married with 2 sons. We never saw his 2 sons, and his wife would spend at least 2 hours in the hallway and reception before going into his room each day, clearly not wanting to be there, and I don't blame her, because when she did go into the room, he would berate her, tell her that this was her fault, like she's the one that caused his cancer, and how much of a loser she was, and the list just went on and on. He was in hospice for 2 weeks. After the first week, I, as a psych, had spoken to her privately a few different times saying, I know you feel loyal to him, but you don't need to be here if you don't want to. But she was insistent that she was going to be there when he died, though I sensed it was more about making sure he was actually dead than anything else. I should also say that he had 2 living parents and 2 siblings living locally, and only his dad dropped by twice for a couple of minutes. The patient had obviously burnt those bridges. Now, while he was in hospice, he yelled at the staff, threw stuff at staff, and was generally abusive. He was one of those patients that would ring the bell constantly for the smallest things and complain that he could hear other patients and their families. Now, nurses are used to dealing with a lot of crap and abuse, unfortunately, but this guy made many of our seasoned staff tap out. We had to have 2 very large security blokes stationed at his door because he was combative. Like I said before, narcissist traits stem from deep insecurity of self, so they resort to manipulation and violence to have some sense of control. But you know what doesn't give a shit about your insecurity? Death. And when you are in hospice and it's coming for you, well, they will fight anyone like they are fighting death itself. He died alone, unsurprisingly. Now, I know many of you will be thinking, well, you sound so under-empathetic, you're horrible, you can't be a psych. Let's put this another way. We have 14 beds in our hospice. That one patient was abusing staff, physically and verbally, abusing his wife and father, breaking thousands and thousands of dollars worth of medical equipment, and scaring the hell out of 13 other dying patients and their families. And if you think empathy will help calm him down, you have never crossed the lines of someone with MPD. And unfortunately, you can't just sedate a patient indefinitely, though we were definitely arguing for it. So that was one patient. The other patient was a woman in her 60s, also with cancer. Now, her paperwork stated that she was divorced and she had 3 adult kids. When she came to the hospice, she started asking us to call them and ask them to come in and see her. Now, this isn't uncommon at all, we do it all the time, and her eldest son was written down as her next of kin. So I do the calling round and find out that they all live locally. Okay, bit weird, mother's been put into hospice and the next of kin isn't around, but okay. I first get hold of her youngest, who politely, but in no uncertain terms, tells me that he's definitely not coming in and to only call back when she has been declared dead. That would be the second red flag of the situation. I then get a hold of the middle child, the daughter, who promptly hands the phone to her husband and tells him to deal with it. After asking how long we reckon she's going to be alive still, he says they will think about it and they might come in to visit maybe. Not going well here. Finally, I get a hold of the oldest son, who sighs and says he'll be right over. It's only when he arrives and we chat privately does he explain that he effectively raised his 2 siblings because their mother wasn't interested and simply used them as props in her life. His father stayed as long as he could, drinking to deal with it, but eventually left, and when he tried to get custody of the kids, she lied to the court. Obviously, verbal and emotional abuse by their mother was all too prevalent in this family as well. And sure enough, the moment he steps into her room, she's screaming, "What took you so long? Your siblings are useless and don't love their mother, and how could they betray me?" A lot of overdramatic gestures and fake tears. It was a real performance. One that our other patients did not appreciate having to hear. Anyways, the next day, the daughter comes in with her husband. After about 20 minutes of being in the patient's room, the husband comes out looking frustrated. Now, I've been keeping an eye on this room for obvious reasons, so I ask him how's it going and what's going on. He says his wife wants an apology from her mother for everything, which did surprise me, but also we all know how that's going to go, and it's not going to go the way she wants it to. Narcissists don't apologize because nothing is their fault, according to them. Cue a lot of screaming, security running, and no apology forthcoming. She also died alone, and her family had her body sent for direct cremation, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't go back to pick up her remains either. And all this is not to mention the hell that she put staff through as well. The dying narcissist. I did a lot of asking around at other hospices in the country, both inpatient and home care, to hear their experiences. And it would appear that a narcissist is much more likely to die at home. Now, this isn't in a good death kind of a way. It's more of a I can control everything around me if I'm at home kind of a way. And they will manipulate and control those around them like they have always done in order to care for them in their dying days. And because they are so fearful of the inevitable, they will be even more arrogant, more entitled, and more demanding if that's even possible. They will belittle you more than ever, show no regret, and they will not apologize for anything that they have ever done. unless they can use it to manipulate you. But that's only if their intimidation isn't effective. The irony in all of this is that this kind of person's biggest fear is dying alone. And a lot of them do. They have pushed away everyone. No one wants to be near them. But so many of them have beaten down, manipulated, and crushed the self-esteem and self-worth of those around them, usually their kids, that they are able to manipulate them, usually through guilt, to care for them during this time. All that is to say, dying is not going to soften someone with NPD, so don't get your hopes up. The aftermath. A narcissist's ways don't tend to stop after they're dead. They will not show any regret or guilt for what they have done, and when they die, you should not expect to get anything from them in their will. It will be left to the golden child, to their enablers. It will be left to people who validated the illusions of their false self, people who were susceptible to their manipulation, people who didn't try to oppose their false narrative, people who kept a code of silence. Or, more likely, they will leave everything to their dog, or attempt to, or to some random charity because they know it will make them look good after death. It's all about the facade. So don't be thinking, thank God they're finally dead, at least I'll get part of the estate, because it's unlikely. Also, we touched a bit on this in our video about when someone you despise dies, but when someone like this eventually dies, that's not going to make the pain go away. Many victims of these people expect that they will feel a massive weight lift off their shoulders when their abuser finally dies, but that is rarely the case. So don't wait for that. Seek help for yourself long before that moment happens. Seek out a mental health professional, preferably one who specializes in personality disorders, because that means they also specialize in the damage that they cause. There are also many support groups out there. Some are very specific, like for kids of those with personality disorders, and some are more general, like survivors of abuse. But also surround yourself with positive, respectful people that will help build up your self-worth again. As bad as it sounds, a dying narcissist is simultaneously the saddest, most pathetic, but infuriating thing you'll ever see. Our hospice has cared for dying patients with antisocial personality disorder, and they were much easier to deal with than those with NPD. They weren't great by any means, but they were easier to deal with. The traits of a narcissist will only become worse as they become more aware of their inevitable death. And there is no shame, and you should feel no guilt at all in walking away from these people even when they are dying. And with all that, go talk death.